period of time in hospital today after experiencing the temporary side effects of his cancer treatment. He's now returned to Clarence House, where he's continuing to work, but all official engagements tomorrow have been postponed.
Queen Camilla's hands were shaking, her voice cracked, and then came the words that changed everything. For over a year, the palace has been hiding the real truth about King Charles's cancer battle. But Camilla finally broke her silence, and what she revealed is absolutely devastating. Royal insiders are calling it the most shocking confession in modern history. The story begins over a year and a half ago, in the early weeks of 2024.
Well, clearly for the king, for the queen, and for the wider royal family, this will be a shock. Coming so early on, just 17 months into his reign, he is now facing such a serious health challenge. It was exactly a week ago today, this afternoon, that I was outside the hospital watching as the king left.
King Charles entered a London hospital for what was described as a routine procedure. He was being treated for an enlarged prostate, a common condition affecting many men as they age. The palace was transparent about this particular health matter, even noting that the king wanted to share these details to encourage other men experiencing similar symptoms to seek medical attention. It seemed like a straightforward situation. Charles would have the procedure, recover, and return to his duties. But during that hospital stay, doctors discovered something else, something far more serious. On February 5th, 2024, Buckingham Palace released a statement that changed everything. A form of cancer had been identified during the king's treatment. The announcement was careful and measured, as palace communications always are. They confirmed it was not prostate cancer, but beyond that, details were scarce. The specific type of cancer would remain undisclosed. The stage of the disease would not be shared. The treatment plan would be kept private. Charles had begun a schedule of regular treatments, and while he would step back from public-facing duties temporarily, he would continue with state business and official paperwork behind the scenes. The nation responded with an outpouring of support. Messages flooded in from around the world. People who had never given much thought to the monarchy found themselves concerned about this 75-year-old man who had waited his entire life to become king, only to face a cancer diagnosis just over a year into his reign. Charles himself acknowledged this support in a statement, expressing gratitude to those who had reached out. He mentioned that he remained wholly positive about his treatment and looked forward to returning to full public duty as soon as possible. His decision to share the diagnosis publicly, the palace noted, was made to prevent speculation and to assist public understanding for others affected by cancer. Queen Camilla became a central figure during this time. As Charles began his treatment cycle, she took on additional responsibilities. She attended events alone that would have typically featured both of them. She fielded questions about her husband's health with practiced diplomacy. In late January, just before the cancer diagnosis became public, she had opened a cancer support center at the Royal Free Hospital in London. When asked about Charles during that visit, she simply said he was getting on and doing his best. Looking back now, those words carry additional meaning. She knew what was coming. She knew what they were about to face together. By April 2024, Charles had returned to some public duties. He appeared at the Easter service at Windsor Castle, waving to well-wishers. The message seemed clear. The king was recovering, treatment was progressing, everything was under control. Throughout the spring and summer, he maintained a schedule that surprised many observers. He hosted garden parties, conducted audiences with government ministers and diplomats, and even undertook a significant overseas tour to Australia and Samoa in October. For that trip, his treatment was briefly paused. The king appeared determined to prove that cancer would not stop him from fulfilling his role. Camilla stood beside him through all of it. In interviews, she painted a picture of a man driven by duty, perhaps too driven. She told reporters in April 2025, during a state visit to Italy, that Charles loved his work and that it kept him going. But she also revealed something telling. He would not slow down and would not do what he was told. The problem, she said, was that as he felt better and recovered, he wanted to do more and more. It was both admirable and concerning. Here was a man undergoing cancer treatment who refused to acknowledge his limitations. The palace maintained that Charles was managing well. At the end of 2024, sources confirmed to the media that his treatment would continue into 2025, but they described it as a managed condition. The treatment cycle was ongoing, yes, but the situation appeared stable. The king's treasurer, during the annual financial briefing in July 2025, praised Charles for showing remarkable resilience in maintaining his royal duties while undergoing treatment. He had undertaken a wide program of public and state duties, both at home and overseas. The numbers back this up. 178 audiences related to his constitutional role, dozens of meetings with government ministers, diplomats, and dignitaries. For a man in his mid-70s battling cancer, it was an impressive workload. But there were signs that not everything was as stable as it seemed. In late March 2025, the king experienced what the palace described as temporary side effects from his ongoing cancer treatment. These side effects required a short period of observation in a hospital. His afternoon engagements were postponed, and the following day's schedule was also cleared as a precautionary measure. The palace statement was brief and provided no details about the nature of these side effects. Charles returned to Clarence House the same day, and within a week, he was back to his regular schedule. The incident was described as a bump in the road, nothing that would disrupt his overall positive trajectory. Charles himself occasionally offered small glimpses into his experience. During a visit to Newmarket in July 2025, he spoke with a cancer survivor who asked how he was doing. The king replied that he was feeling a lot better now, and that it was just one of those things. In another conversation during a royal outing, he remarked on the challenges of aging, joking with an elderly woman about how bits don't work as well after 70. These comments were rare. For the most part, Charles kept his private struggles exactly that, private. Queen Camilla, however, was providing updates in her own way. When visiting the new Dyson Cancer Center in Bath in September 2024, she was asked by a staff member how the king was feeling. Her response was simple and positive: "He is doing very well." Later, in April 2025, Charles and Camilla hosted a reception at Buckingham Palace, specifically focused on cancer awareness and support. It was at this event that Charles opened up more than he had before. He spoke about how each cancer diagnosis is a daunting and at times frightening experience for individuals and their loved ones. But he also said that as one among those statistics himself, he could vouch for the fact that it can be an experience that brings into sharp focus the very best of humanity. He thanked healthcare professionals and spoke about the profound impact of human connection during cancer treatment. It was a moving moment, and Camilla was right there with him. Guests at the reception noticed how the royal couple worked the room together, speaking with cancer patients, survivors, and their families. They met with the parents of Deborah James, a journalist and cancer awareness advocate who had died from bowel cancer. Charles quoted one of her famous phrases about rebellious hope. The event seemed to mark a shift in how openly Charles was willing to discuss his journey. Yet even then, the specifics remained hidden. What type of cancer? What stage? What was the prognosis? These questions went unanswered. Then in recent weeks, something changed. Reports began emerging from sources close to the palace that painted a different picture from the one of steady management and resilience. Insiders started speaking about deterioration, about increased frailty, about the king needing to use a walking stick more frequently, not as a traditional accessory, but as a genuine necessity. Photographs surfaced of Charles at his Sandringham estate, walking through the gardens with a wooden cane. To some, it was just an elderly man taking sensible precautions. To others, it was a visible sign that his condition had worsened. And now, Camilla's recent statements are being re-examined. The carefully chosen words about Charles doing his best, the comments about him refusing to slow down, the emotional moments she has shown in public, like the tears that welled in her eyes during a remembrance service in August. People are starting to wonder if these were not just the natural concerns of a devoted wife, but signs of something more serious unfolding behind palace walls. What has Camilla confirmed? And what does it mean for the future of the monarchy? The carefully constructed image of a king managing his illness while maintaining his duties began to crack in ways that palace officials could not entirely control. While Buckingham Palace continued to release measured statements about Charles's condition being managed and his treatment progressing as planned, whispers from within the royal household told a different story. These were not the usual tabloid rumors or speculative gossip. These were concerns being voiced by people who saw the king daily, who witnessed what happened when the cameras were turned off and the public had gone home. Sources close to the palace started speaking more candidly about what they were observing. One insider described Charles as putting on a very brave face in public, but noted that he was often in pain. The smile that the world saw during public engagements was described as an act of strength, rather than a reflection of how he truly felt. Another source painted an even more concerning picture, suggesting that the king's health had deteriorated significantly in recent months. These were not minor adjustments or temporary setbacks. According to those who claimed to know, Charles was facing a tough and losing battle with his illness. The walking stick became a focal point of this conversation. Charles had used walking sticks before his cancer diagnosis, particularly during outdoor pursuits at his country estates. He was known for his love of the countryside, his interest in organic farming, and his long walks through the grounds of Sandringham and Highgrove. But the recent images of him using a cane were different. The way he leaned on it, the careful placement of each step, the visible effort required for what should be simple movements. Royal watchers and medical observers noted these changes. One source claimed that the walking stick had transformed from a traditional accessory into a necessity, a tool he now required for mobility rather than a choice. Reports suggested that Charles was now shuffling around rather than walking with his former confident stride. Some sources went further, claiming that the king was turning to whiskey to manage his discomfort and despair. Whether these specific claims about alcohol use were accurate or exaggerated, they reflected a narrative that was beginning to take hold, that the king's condition was far more serious than official statements suggested. One particularly stark comment from an insider claimed that Charles, at 76 years old, had become very frail and that he knew his end was near. These were dramatic assertions, difficult to verify but impossible to ignore completely given their specificity and the number of sources making similar claims. The palace found itself in a difficult position. Medical privacy is a fundamental right, and Charles had every reason to keep the details of his diagnosis and treatment confidential. The specific type of cancer, the stage at which it was discovered, the treatment protocols being used, the prognosis he had been given by his doctors. All of this was deeply personal information. Yet the king was not a private citizen. He was the head of state, the symbolic leader of the nation and the Commonwealth. His health had implications that extended far beyond his personal well-being. Questions about succession planning, about the stability of the monarchy, about whether he could fulfill his constitutional duties. These were matters of public interest. Queen Camilla found herself navigating this impossible balance. She needed to protect her husband's privacy and dignity, while also managing public concern and maintaining confidence in the institution. Those who observed her closely noticed the toll this was taking. At the remembrance service marking the 80th anniversary of VJ Day in August, Camilla was visibly emotional. When a 105-year-old veteran who had served in the 11th Sikh Regiment went off script to salute King Charles before reading from his wartime diary, tears filled Camilla's eyes. One rolled down her cheek. For a woman known for her composure and ability to maintain a cheerful public face, this moment of vulnerability was striking. Behind the scenes, Camilla was doing far more than most people realized. She had effectively become the gatekeeper to the king, controlling access and managing the flow of information. Some saw this as protective and necessary. Charles was undergoing treatment, dealing with side effects, managing pain. He needed someone to shield him from unnecessary demands and allow him to focus on his health. But others viewed Camilla's control with suspicion. Was she being transparent with other members of the royal family? Were senior advisors getting accurate information about the king's condition? Or was she filtering and managing the narrative in ways that served her own interests and her vision of how to protect the monarchy? The relationship between Camilla and other senior royals became a subject of quiet speculation. Princess Anne, Charles's sister, and a woman known for her no-nonsense approach and deep loyalty to the institution, was reportedly concerned about being kept at arm's length. Prince William, as heir to the throne, needed accurate information about his father's condition to prepare for what might come. Yet there were suggestions that even he was not getting the full picture. The palace was functioning in an atmosphere of controlled information, with Camilla at the center of that control. Meanwhile, Charles himself continued to push forward. Royal aides described him as driven by duty, determined to carry on despite his physical limitations. His personal aide told reporters that Charles was managing his cancer, trying to live as normally as possible. The approach, according to this aide, was to do what the doctor said and just get on with life. Charles felt incredibly fit, or at least that was what he projected. His positive mindset was seen as a crucial factor in how well he was dealing with the illness. But there was a fine line between admirable determination and dangerous denial of reality. The question of whether Charles was doing too much became increasingly pressing. Medical experts not involved in his care noted publicly that cancer treatment, particularly for someone in their mid-70s, required rest and recovery time. The body needed resources to fight the disease and manage the side effects of treatment. Maintaining a schedule of hundreds of engagements, hosting state visits, traveling internationally. These activities placed enormous demands on someone who should arguably be conserving their strength. Queen Camilla had acknowledged this tension herself, noting that Charles loved his work and wanted to do more and more, and that this was actually a problem. Some observers wondered if Charles was trying to prove something. He had waited longer than any heir in British history to become king. His mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had reigned for 70 years. Charles was 73 when he finally ascended to the throne. Perhaps there was a sense that he had limited time to establish his legacy, to make his mark as monarch. Perhaps he feared that if he stepped back too much, questions would arise about whether he should abdicate in favor of William. Perhaps he simply could not conceive of being anything other than fully engaged in his role. Whatever the motivation, those closest to him worried that his refusal to slow down was accelerating his decline rather than demonstrating his fitness. The March hospitalization for treatment side effects had been a warning sign, though the palace had downplayed it as a temporary bump in the road. Medical professionals noted that side effects serious enough to require hospital observation indicated that treatment was taking a significant toll on the king's body. Cancer treatments, particularly for undisclosed types of cancer, can involve chemotherapy, radiation, targeted therapies, immunotherapy, or combinations of these approaches. Each comes with its own set of potential side effects: fatigue, nausea, pain, compromised immune function, organ stress. Managing these while maintaining any kind of active schedule, let alone the schedule of a working monarch, was extraordinarily challenging. Reports emerged that Charles was exploring alternative and complementary approaches to managing his condition. Given his long-standing interest in organic farming, natural remedies, and holistic health, this was not surprising. Sources claimed he was interested in the medicinal properties of cannabis for pain management, though there was no confirmation of whether he was actually using it. He had also apparently been paying close attention to diet and nutrition, discussing with cancer patients he met about how food choices could help with treatment. These were the kind of details that suggested Charles was actively engaged in managing his condition, looking for every possible avenue to improve his situation. But the overarching question remained: was his condition actually improving, remaining stable, or deteriorating? The palace insisted on the former or middle option. Treatment was ongoing, the king was managing well, he remained positive and engaged. Yet the sources painting a darker picture kept emerging. By August, multiple outlets were reporting claims that Charles's health had been deteriorating more and more. One source suggested It would not be surprising if the situation prompted Prince William and Prince Harry to reconnect, with their father's declining health potentially serving as the catalyst that finally pushed the estranged brothers to reconcile. The mention of Harry was significant. The relationship between Charles and his younger son had been fractured for years, ever since Harry and Meghan Markle stepped back from royal duties and eventually relocated to California. The couple's interview with Oprah Winfrey, the revelations in Harry's memoir, the ongoing disputes about security arrangements and family dynamics. All of this had created a seemingly unbridgeable gulf. Yet in September, Harry was photographed arriving at Clarence house, apparently meeting with his father for the first time in 19 months. The fact that this reunion happened at all suggested that something significant had shifted. Harry himself had said in an interview that he would love reconciliation with his family, noting that life is precious and expressing uncertainty about how much longer his father had. For Queen Camilla, managing all of these dynamics while dealing with her own emotions about her husband's illness was an enormous burden. She had been married to Charles for nearly 20 years. They had weathered storms together, faced public scrutiny, and gradually won acceptance from people who had initially viewed her as the woman who had interfered in Charles and Diana's marriage. She had worked hard to carve out her own role within the royal family, supporting causes related to literacy, domestic violence prevention, and animal welfare. Now she found herself in perhaps the most difficult role of all, supporting a dying man while trying to hold together an institution that was facing unprecedented uncertainty. The question everyone was asking became impossible to ignore. What exactly had Queen Camilla confirmed about King Charles's condition, and what did it mean for the future? The answer was complicated, wrapped in layers of official statements, carefully chosen words, and the growing gap between what the palace was saying and what people were observing. Camilla had not made a single dramatic announcement revealing some hidden truth about Charles's health. Instead, her confirmation came through a series of statements, moments, and actions that, when pieced together, painted a picture far more concerning than the official narrative suggested. When Camilla told visitors at the Dyson Cancer Center that Charles was doing very well, she was offering reassurance in the way that royals are trained to do. But those same words, when placed alongside reports of deteriorating health and increased frailty, took on a different meaning. Was he doing very well for someone battling cancer? Was he doing very well compared to how he had been a month earlier? Or was this simply what one says when asked about a spouse's serious illness in a public setting? The ambiguity was itself revealing. Camilla was walking a tightrope between honesty and institutional loyalty, between her role as a concerned wife and her responsibility as queen consort. Her emotional moments in public spoke volumes that her words could not. The tears at the VJ Day ceremony were not scripted or theatrical. They were the genuine reaction of a woman under enormous stress, watching her husband push himself beyond what seemed wise or safe, knowing things that the public did not know, carrying burdens that she could not share. Royal observers who had followed Camilla for years noted that these displays of emotion were uncharacteristic. She had built her public persona on being steady, cheerful, and unflappable. The fact that her composure was cracking suggested that the situation was more serious than anyone wanted to admit. The palace faced a fundamental dilemma about how much to reveal. There were good arguments for maintaining privacy. Charles deserved dignity in his illness. Releasing detailed medical information could create panic, destabilize the public mood, and cause unnecessary alarm. Every update would be dissected by medical experts in the media. Every setback would become a crisis. But there were equally compelling arguments for greater transparency. The British people had a right to know about the health of their head of state. Succession planning needed to happen with clear information. Prince William and Catherine were already taking on more responsibilities, but they needed to know what timeline they were working with. Prince William found himself in an impossible position. He was watching his father battle a serious illness while trying to respect his privacy and follow his wishes about how much information to share. Catherine had dealt with her own cancer diagnosis and treatment in early 2024, though by September she had announced she had completed chemotherapy. Sources close to William and Catherine suggested they were aware the timeline might be accelerating. One insider claimed there were whispers behind the scenes that Charles's health was more fragile than reported, and that William and Catherine understood they might need to step up sooner than either had imagined. The strain was showing in their public appearances. The question of Charles's legacy became increasingly urgent. What would he be remembered for? If his reign was cut short by illness, would history view him as a transitional figure? Someone who held the throne briefly between the long reign of Elizabeth II and the eventual reign of William? Or would he be seen as someone who showed courage and dedication, continuing to serve even while gravely ill? Charles had spent decades championing causes like environmental conservation and architectural preservation. But serious illness has a way of overshadowing everything else. There was also the matter of reconciliation, particularly with Prince Harry. Multiple sources suggested that Charles's illness had prompted him to think about healing family wounds. The private meeting with Harry in September was seen as significant. Harry had made public statements about wanting to reconcile, about recognizing that life is precious, and that he did not know how much longer his father had. Charles reportedly felt similarly. He did not want his legacy to be defined by family estrangement and bitter public feuds. But the complications were enormous. Trust had been broken, and Prince William, according to sources, remained opposed to welcoming Harry back. The public was caught between conflicting information. Official palace statements remained optimistic and measured. Charles was continuing his treatment, managing well, remaining positive. But reports and claims from unnamed sources painted a picture of a man in serious decline, using a walking stick out of necessity, in pain, possibly aware that his time was limited. Who should people believe? What Camilla had confirmed in the end was less about specific medical details and more about the reality that Charles was in a serious fight for his life. Her emotional reactions, her protective stance, her careful words that tried to balance honesty with hope, all of these confirmed what many had suspected. The king's cancer was not a minor inconvenience that could be easily managed and overcome. It was a significant threat to his health and his life. The confirmation that people were looking for, the clear statement about exactly what was wrong with Charles and what his prognosis was, might never come. But Camilla's tears, her protective presence, and the growing evidence that Charles was more unwell than officially acknowledged, all of this confirmed the essential truth. The king was seriously ill, the situation was concerning, and the future of the monarchy was more uncertain than it had been in decades.